Welcome back. We're going to continue where we left off from the last video where we had set up all of the different allied factions. In this one, we're going to be creating the enemy ship's different behaviors. Alright, so I'm now going to head over to the parent enemy ship because the first thing I want to do is set up the kind of common behaviors for the ships and the common properties. So right now, all we're doing is inheriting from our parent. I also want to add a few more variables. So again, make sure we're inheriting from our parent. And now I'm also going to set the speed of the ships. So I might get some of these to override these variables, but they'll be just base variables for all the ships. So 2 for now. And we know all ships are going to have a direction, and actually I want them all to choose a random direction. So we can go random range, anything from 0 up to 359. I'm also going to set its image angle to be facing that direction so that it's turning in the same way that it's going. And I'm also going to set up some HP, so hit points. And I'll set this to 1 by default. Again, we're going to want to overwrite that in some of them as well. But for now, let's just keep it general. So that's its creation code. How about we do its destroy code? So I think we'll just keep it simple, and much like the asteroids, for example, we might just grab this code for creating debris objects and do the same thing. So I'll put that in here. And I might play a sound effect as well, so just the dying sound effect. And I might also add to the score of the player. And now I do want it to add maybe different scores depending on the ship. So I might want the raiders to be worth a bit less than the brutes or the hunters. So I could have them all have different destroy events, but another way that we can kind of keep it a little bit more compact is to just use a switch statement. And I'm going to switch its object index. So this means we can kind of do different things depending on what object it actually is. If it is the raider, then we're going to add, let's say, 15. And I'm just going to copy that and paste it. If it's the hunter, let's add a bit more. And the brute, we'll add 50. And like I said, if it was any more complicated than this, if we were having different particle effects, explosions for the different enemies, if it was going to update a quest or anything, I might want to split this into their own separate destroy events, but because they're so similar at the moment, I'm just going to leave it like this. All right, great. Now, another thing that I want it to do that a lot of our objects are already doing, so say the player, and this is going to be good especially if we're giving chase to the player, but if the player is going outside of the room, we were wrapping it around the room, I'm going to just copy that and add it to the enemy's outside room code. So we can go other outside room, and I'm going to put it there. Great. So that's a very general piece of code that all of them can share. And finally, just like the player and the asteroids, who both have a take damage event, I also want the enemies to have the same thing. So let's head back to the enemy, add a take damage, so user event 1. And in here, so remember, we'd set up an HP value. This might not be 1, so we want to make this code general. We want to subtract 1 if HP is less than or equal to 0. And I'm putting less than just in case, I don't know, there's a gun that the player has that can deal multiple points of damage and we go into the negatives. In that case, we'll destroy ourselves. The destroy code will run and we'll do all of this. Excellent. So now that's great. All of the enemies are inheriting this code, but now we want to go ahead and make them a little bit different. So I think the Raider and the Hunter are going to have all of these values, but I want to change a couple of them in the Brute. So let's come over to the Brute. I want to overwrite this. I do want to inherit it though, so that we retain all of the inherited events from the parents. And I'm just going to change its HP to 5. I'm going to change its speed to 1. Actually, and another thing that we have to do is, because it has a sprite that is animating, right now it's going to be looking like this if it appears in the game. And remember, I don't want it to actually be cycling through these. I wanted these to be representative of its health. So we can just head back to the Brute, and I'm going to stop it from animating. So I'm going to turn its image speed off. And this is great because this code isn't going to be run by the other ships. Maybe they will be animating in the future, but this one will not be. All right, great. So now we want to start setting up their behavior. Or actually, before we even do that, I might just spawn a bunch of these in the room so that we can test if our bullets work. So let's head over to the game object. And when we are creating the asteroids, so remember how we created this spawn off camera? We can reuse this to spawn the ships. So I'm going to just copy paste that a couple times. And I'm going to spawn some Raiders, let's say 8. OBJ Brute. 3. OBJ Hunter can be 5. Alright, so that will spawn them all around the room. Let's run the game and test our guns. So let's look around a bit. So actually, they have all picked a direction and they should be moving in that direction. They won't be responding to us. Let's just check if they're wrapping. Awesome, they are. Whoops. Well, we know our collision's working. Let's actually try and shoot them though. Great, so they blow up as well. All right, good. Now let's get them changing their behavior when the player comes into their sights. All right, so let's come over to the Raider first, and we'll be doing this in the step event, of course. This is the update frame. All right, now, essentially what I'm going to be doing is checking if player is inside range, otherwise no change. So the way that we're going to do this is checking if point distance from ourselves to the ship object is less than a certain radius. I'm going to put 250 for this one. Otherwise, no change. Now, before we even move on, one thing that we should put in here is just make sure that the ship actually does exist at the moment, because remember, if the ship is currently blown up and destroyed, there's a brief period of time before the room resets that the player's not there. So we need to check if the player doesn't exist, so if not instance exists, OBJ ship, we're going to exit and we're not going to run any of this. Alright, so if it's within our range, then basically for the Raider, I just want it to turn to look at the player and then make a bullet. So turn to look at player ship, fire bullet. Okay. So again, we are going to need the direction from us to the player. And there's a nice handy function called point direction that will get that for us. So we can go xy obj ship.x .y, and this will return the direction between us and the ship. So we need to save this in a new variable. So I'm going to call this new direction because that is where we want to start pointing. We don't want to actually, for the Raiders, have them turn and move towards the player. So it's actually not a direction, it's more an angle. So I'm going to call this new angle. And now I'm going to change the image angle to be the new angle. And let me just see if that works. So let's go and try and find a Raider. So there you go. It's a little abrupt, the change, and so I might make this a little bit more gradual. Instead of just immediately turning, I'm going to lerp it, which is linear interpolation, which to make it a bit more gradual. So we're going to move from whatever our current image angle is to the new one by an amount of, let's just go with something quite low at the moment. And I'm going to run that again and see how it looks. There we go. So that's a lot smoother, but there is a problem. If you just saw it there, that when we pass 0, which is actually to our right, and go into the 300s, kind of when the angle wraps back around. So right here. So I'm going to use a little bit of maths to, instead of getting this angle, I want to get the closest angle to the one that we currently are at. So I'm going to modify new angle to equal image angle minus angle difference image angle. Now, what does this do? So we are getting our current image angle. So say that that is currently 10 minus the angle difference between these two. So if our current angle is 10 and the new angle is 350, technically the difference between 350 and 10 is 340, but I don't want the ship to rotate all the way around from here to 340. I want it to go the close way from 10 to 350, and that difference is actually 20. And that is what this is going to return for us. It's going to turn the actual difference. So if we have 10 minus the difference between us, right? So if that is returning 20, and that is our current angle, so it would be 10 minus 20, that is going to equal 350, and that's the angle that we want. So if you don't understand that, I encourage you to plug in a few different ones, but this way we're going to get the shortest difference between the two. So now if I run it, it should be lerping correctly. Now, if we've gone outside the range, I'm going to similarly move back to our current direction because our direction hasn't changed. We're still moving through space. So that way we should move to look at the player when the player is close and then move back when we go outside of their range. So again, we'll just test this really quickly. There we go. And when we move outside of range, it should flip back. All right. Great. So the only thing left to do is fire the bullet. All right. Now, technically all we have to do is use our script, create bullet, and we can plug in image angle, the speed. So like I said, I wanted this to actually be a little bit slower than the player. So instead of 6, I might have just 4. You could make this a instance variable if you want. I might just put 4 for now. And faction in here like that. But that would mean that it's creating a bullet every single second. So it's going to create a lot of bullets to head towards the player. And I might want it to just create a bullet every few frames. So I am going to set up a kind of counter that we're going to increment and check every step. And only if we get to a certain value will it create a bullet. So I'm going to say bullet counter equals 0. And of course, actually, we have to remember to inherit from our parent. I've been inherited. All right, bullet counter. This is the value that we're going to use in here. So we're going to increment bullet counter every frame. So this is going to go up by 1. And if bullet counter is larger than something, so I might say 60 frames, so that should be like 1 second, then we can create the bullet. We do also want to remember to reset bullet counter back to 0 so that we can go through this process again. Okay, so now for the big test. So we should be able to fire at them and they should be able to fire at us. So let's see. So it is shooting us. Their bullets are red, so the bullets should be part of the correct faction. All right, and they do blow us up. Wasn't very accurate, but at the moment we don't need a really good AI in here. That should do us fine. And you can see it is actually shooting up the asteroids as well. All right, so that's it for the radar. And I might just copy and paste this. Now, this might also be a point where we can kind of share code and optimize and have, say, a few scripts for turning to face the player and everything. But for now, I might just keep it simple and reuse the code. It might be a challenge for you to do this yourself, to try and abstract a lot of this into reusable scripts, or we can just change one variable. So for example, you might make it that we can just set a radius for the different objects, and maybe they've got different radiuses. But anyway, so for the hunter, we are also going to want to act differently if the player is inside our range and not. They will also shoot, but I wanted to make their bullets quite fast. So already I'm just going to change that to 8. And now, not only do I want them to look at the player's ship, so I'm going to keep all of this, but I also want it to start moving towards the ship. So I'm going to say direction equals image angle. So it's going to head towards the ship, but I don't want it to actually go right into the ship. The brute actually is going to do that, but we don't want to. We're going to keep our distance, because if we move into the ship, well, maybe we could destroy the hunter or something. But for now, let's just set it up. So I'm going to use this as well, again, to check for a smaller radius. Let's just say 150 for now. And so that means if we're quite close to the player, then I'm actually going to decrease our speed a little bit. And then if we come back outside this radius, I'm going to start to increase our speed a little bit. Maybe a little bit less. So you can play around with these values. Again, this just feels good to me. So, but now it's going to kind of go in and out of the player's range. So it's going to kind of look like it's taking some evasive maneuvers. You can try and make this a little bit more sophisticated if you want, but this is going to work fine. The only other thing I want to change is we don't really need it to head back in its old direction, but I do want it to head back to its normal speed when the player goes out of range. So I might change this. I'm going to delete it. And I'm going to put lerp speed to 0.1. So this is going to basically go back to its original speed of 2. Again, this could be something that you abstract into variables and have like a original speed. Like this, and we can use that here. All right, cool. So that is the hunter setup. And I might also just go ahead and go to the brute and do the same thing. So I'm going to copy paste it in its event here. I don't want it to be doing this check. I want it to be moving towards the player, though. That's good. But I also want it to not be shooting. So I want to remove the shooting code as well. What I do want it to do, that's different than the other ones, is increase its speed every frame that it's chasing the player. Now, I could get it to share this exact thing with the hunter. Actually, that is turning out to be a useful value for us. So I might put it in the parent ship so that all of our ships have an original speed. And this is the kind of thing that you'll notice as you go on through development. You might see that a certain variable is actually handy to have in a lot of different things, and so you'll go ahead and add it to the parent. So it's a good practice to kind of do that on the go. Let's head back to the hunter. So I can actually remove that entire event. It can just inherit from its parent because that's setting up an original speed. And come back to the brute. Great. Now, the very last thing that is different about the brutes is its sprite. So at the moment, I want its frame that it's displaying to the player to reflect its current health. So we head back to the brute. Remember, this is at full health, so I actually want its image index or its frame to be equal to one of these. So if I say, if its HP is currently equal to 5, then I want to set it to this frame. So I want its frame to be equal to its HP, and we're actually going to have to -1 because frames start at 0, so that would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's head back to the brute. And we can set it up here actually. We do want it to update. We don't want to set this just once. So image index equals HP -1. All right, so let's save and run that. So space should be a lot more dangerous now. Let's go and try and find the ships. So there's a brute. Let's check if it is giving chase. Ooh, it's speeding up. Ooh, and we've got an error. So it's telling us that the hunter object isn't setting up its bullet counter. Okay. So yet again, we've found a variable that is handy for multiple objects, but remember, we actually only set this up in the hunter. And I want to keep this in just because it is good to be able to problem solve on the go and have an understanding of what the error messages say. So remember, this was being set up just in the Raider. I'm going to add this to the parent. So let's go over to parent enemy and bullet counter, because both the Raider and the hunter are checking that. And you could actually do some more things here. So we could reduce the time that the Raider is shooting to make it even, that the hunter is shooting to make it even more dangerous. And let's run that again. And there's a hunter, so we can see it's turned to shoot, and it's very fast and dangerous. All right, so we're gonna have to be careful around them. Might just shoot. There we go. All right, so we can see that the game is a lot harder already. Now, I am noticing that the brute is moving a little bit faster than I'm expecting. And I think that is because when it is inheriting the code from its parent, we are setting that original speed value, and we haven't updated that yet. So that's still holding the value to the original speed. So it's returning back to 2, which is not what we want. So we have to be careful and make sure that we're setting original speed again. And that should be good. All right, so I'm quite happy with that. We might leave it there for this video. So we've set up all of the factions and all of the enemies now, and we have a really nice flexible system for adding in new objects in the future. In the coming videos, we're going to be adding some power-ups that might add some different guns to the player, allow them to be invincible, and we'll also be adding some special particle effects to make our game a little bit prettier. We might add some propulsion, we might change how the objects are destroying themselves to make it a little bit more polished. So I'll see you in the next tutorial.